In the bustling streets of Manhattan, a young boy named Lucas struggled to survive, carrying the weight of a lost mother and the burden of a hard life. At just 12 years old, Lucas's world was a constant fight, selling candy to strangers and searching for the one person he loved the most, his mother Regina. She had disappeared without a trace, leaving Lucas desperate and alone. His heart ached with the memories of a better time, a life that had crumbled after they were evicted from their home. Fate, however, introduced Marcus Adams, a man who saved Lucas from a terrible encounter with the police. Marcus offered him shelter and hope, but Lucas soon discovered a dark truth: Marcus was responsible for the eviction that destroyed his family. This revelation brought a storm of anger and confusion, leaving Lucas torn between the help Marcus offered and the pain he had caused. As the two navigated this complex relationship, they found themselves drawn into a deeper challenge, finding Regina, who was gravely ill. The final days of her life tested Lucas and Marcus's bond, but ultimately, it was a journey of loss, redemption, and the hope of healing the wounds that time and circumstances had inflicted on them. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The streets of Manhattan buzzed with relentless energy, a sea of hurried people rushing in every direction like ants in a frantic hive. Among the blur of faces, one figure stood apart: a young boy, barely 12 years old, his eyes heavy with sorrow and his face etched with a weariness no child should bear. His name was Lucas, and he knew these streets far more intimately than any boy his age ever should. Clutched tightly in his small, trembling hands was a box of candy, the last fragile piece of a life that had once been stable, now shattered beyond recognition. But Lucas wasn't just selling candy to scrape together a few dollars. He was wandering with a heart full of desperation, driven by the aching hope that somewhere, somehow, he would find his mother, Regina. Regina, her name alone brought an avalanche of emotions: warmth and pain, love and loss. Lucas could still picture her face, radiant with a smile just for him every morning, her fingers gently tousling his hair as she sent him off to school with promises that no matter how difficult life became, they would survive as long as they had each other. But life, cruel and unrelenting, had other plans. It all unraveled the day Regina lost her job at the small convenience store. At first, it was just overdue bills, but soon it was rent. The days blurred into nights, and before Lucas could fully grasp the gravity of it, they were being evicted. The memory of that day was seared into his soul: the cold click of the door shutting behind them, the biting wind that cut through him, and the weight of the world pressing down on his young shoulders. In that moment, everything changed. The streets became their new reality, and Lucas watched helplessly as his mother's spirit dimmed. Her once bright eyes, which had always sparkled with hope, now seemed dull, clouded by despair. They lived day by day, scavenging what they could, but with each passing week, Regina seemed to wither. Then, one night, she was simply gone. Lucas awoke to find her missing: no note, no trace, no explanation. He searched every corner of the city, asking strangers and wandering, but it was as if she had vanished into the very fabric of New York. The emptiness that settled in his chest was unbearable, the gnawing ache of abandonment. He was alone in a world too vast and too indifferent to care. That afternoon, with his hope wearing thin, Lucas wandered to the Upper East Side, a part of the city where the wealthy resided in luxury far removed from the harsh realities he faced. He knew they wouldn't spare much thought for a boy like him, but hope was a stubborn thing, and it was all he had left. With trembling hands, he stood on a busy street corner, holding out his box of candy like a lifeline, whispering into the void, "Candy, sir. Just $1." His voice was barely audible over the roar of the city, and most people passed him by without even a glance, their eyes sliding over him as if he were invisible. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Just as he was about to give in to the crushing weight of despair and find a dark alley to sleep in for the night, a shadow loomed behind him. His heart quickened with unease. Slowly, he turned to see 2 police officers walking toward him, their gazes cold and sharp, filled with suspicion. Lucas felt his pulse race. He had seen this before, and it never ended well. "Hey, kid," one of the officers called out, his voice gruff, his frame towering and intimidating. "What are you doing here?" Lucas swallowed hard, his chest tightening with anxiety as he stood under the intense gaze of the officers. "I'm selling candy, sir," he stammered, trying to force a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His voice shook with fear, each word carrying the weight of the desperation he felt. Selling candy, huh? The taller officer, his face twisted with suspicion, plucked one of the candy bars from Lucas's box, inspecting it as though it held a dark secret. And what else are you up to? Or should I say, stealing? His words dripped with accusation. Lucas's heart raced, panic bubbling up as his eyes widened. No, sir. I didn't steal anything, he pleaded, shaking his head fervently, his voice cracking under the weight of their accusations. I'm just trying to make enough money to eat and to find my mom. The first officer smirked, his lips curling into a cruel smile. Oh, right, the lost kid routine. How original, he said, crouching down until his face was mere inches from Lucas's, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. Tell me, kid, where's the wallet you swiped? Lucas recoiled, the words hitting him like a physical blow. He could feel the tears brimming in his eyes, his voice now a trembling whisper. I swear, I didn't steal anything. Please, believe me. The taller officer, now growing impatient, barked. Empty your pockets, now. With shaking hands, Lucas obeyed, his breath shallow as he fumbled to pull the contents from his pockets. He dropped a few coins, a worn slip of paper with the address of the shelter he sometimes called home, and a crumpled photo of his mother, Regina, onto the sidewalk. The officers watched with cold detachment. That's it, the burly officer scoffed, glaring at the meager items Lucas had laid out. He picked up the photo, glanced at it for a fleeting moment, then tossed it back onto the ground as if it meant nothing. And this is your mom, he asked, his voice thick with mockery and disdain. Lucas felt the tears spill over, his body shaking as he nodded. Yes, sir. Please, she's all I have left. Don't hurt her, he begged, his voice cracking with anguish. The second officer let out a harsh, humorless laugh. We're not playing games, kid. If you're lying, we'll make sure you regret it. How'd you like to spend the night in a jail cell? They don't treat kids like you too kindly in there. I'm not lying, Lucas cried out, his voice breaking into a sob as the tears ran freely down his cheeks. He glanced around, hoping, praying that someone, anyone, would help him. But the busy streets of Manhattan remained indifferent. People passed by, their eyes averted, unwilling to involve themselves in the scene unfolding before them. Lucas had never felt so powerless, so alone. This kid's lying right to our faces, the burly officer muttered, his irritation growing. He looked at his partner with a sneer. Let's take him in. A night in a cell should straighten him out. But before they could act, a deep, commanding voice cut through the tension. What's going on here? The officers froze, turning around in surprise, and Lucas followed their gaze. A tall, imposing man in a sharp suit was approaching. His expression was one of unmistakable authority, his eyes fixed on the officers with a steely intensity. I said, what's going on here? The man repeated, his voice calm but filled with a weight that seemed to hang in the air, thickening the tension between them. Who are you? The burly officer asked, his earlier bravado now laced with unease. We're just doing our job, sir. Your job? The man's gaze shifted to Lucas, who was now curled up on the sidewalk, surrounded by his scattered belongings. The sight seemed to ignite something in the stranger, his eyes darkened with anger. This doesn't look like an investigation. This looks like harassment, he said, his voice sharp with contempt. What's the charge? The second officer rattled, cleared his throat, roared, and replied, we got a call about a kid who stole a lady's wallet. He matches the description. We're investigating. Investigating, the man shot back, stepping closer, his presence towering over the officers. And have you found this supposed wallet? Any witnesses to back up your claim? Or are you just accusing this boy because he looks like an easy target? The officers shifted uncomfortably under the man's piercing gaze. His words, laced with righteous fury, had stripped away their confidence, leaving them floundering. Lucas looked up at the stranger with wide, tear-streaked eyes, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in what felt like forever. The man turned to Lucas, his expression softening as he knelt beside him. It's going to be okay, he said gently, offering the boy a hand. You're safe now. Oh. Look, sir, we don't know who you are, but the burly officer started, his words dripping with defiance, but Marcus cut him off before he could finish. I'm Marcus Adams. The name hung in the air like a forceful gust of wind, and the reaction from the officers was immediate. They exchanged nervous glances, finally realizing who they were dealing with. Marcus Adams wasn't just a name they knew, it carried weight, power, and influence. And I strongly suggest you reconsider this absurd course of action, because if you continue harassing this boy, I will make sure your lives become very complicated. Lucas stood frozen, still trembling from the encounter, but as he glanced at Marcus, a flicker of hope ignited within him. This man, a stranger moments ago, now seemed like his only lifeline. He stared at Marcus with awe and gratitude, not fully understanding why this man had come to his rescue, but knowing instinctively that his intervention had changed everything. Marcus turned his attention back to the officers, his voice steady and calm but seething with barely contained anger. "He's just a kid trying to survive," he said, bending down to help Lucas pick up his scattered belongings, the few remnants of a life stripped away too soon. "And instead of protecting him, you're adding to his trauma. Do you want to be responsible for that?" The burly officer, feeling the power shift, took a cautious step back, his confidence visibly shaken. He realized that continuing down this path could spell trouble for his career. "All right," he muttered, his tone begrudging, "but if we catch him doing anything suspicious, we won't hesitate to act." Marcus, his voice cold and precise, replied, "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." Without another glance at the officers, he placed a protective hand on Lucas's shoulder and guided him away from the scene, the heavy weight of the confrontation lifting as they walked. As they navigated the bustling streets of Manhattan, Lucas finally found his voice. "Thank you, sir, for helping me," he whispered, his voice still trembling but laced with a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel alone. "You're safe now," Marcus responded with a faint smile, though his eyes betrayed a complexity that Lucas couldn't quite decipher. There was something about the way Marcus carried himself, an air of responsibility mixed with sorrow that unsettled the boy. "Let's get you something to eat and find a place where you can rest," Marcus continued. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "And maybe we can talk about your mother." Lucas nodded, his heart tightening at the mention of Regina. For the first time in months, a glimmer of hope flickered in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this man could help him find her. But even as that hope began to grow, there was something in Marcus's demeanor that made Lucas uneasy, a shadow in his eyes that hinted at a burden he was carrying, a burden Lucas didn't yet understand. As they neared a small restaurant, Marcus asked, "Where did you and your mother used to live?" Lucas hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice barely audible. "In Harlem, sir, before we were evicted." If you're still tuned into this video and find this story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The simple mention of Harlem seemed to trigger something in Marcus. His steps slowed, and for a fleeting moment, his gaze drifted off into the distance, his face etched with a mixture of recognition and sorrow. "Harlem," he repeated softly, as if the word stirred a memory long buried. But whatever thought had crossed his mind, he kept it to himself, his expression closing off as quickly as it had opened. Lucas noticed the change, but he didn't push for answers. He had learned long ago that some things were better left unsaid. Still, as they entered the warm glow of the restaurant, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that this man, his unexpected savior, was not just helping out of kindness. There was something deeper, something tied to his past, that connected them. And for the first time in a long while, Lucas wondered whether the answers he sought about his mother were bound up in the mysteries that Marcus himself carried. The cozy warmth of the restaurant enveloped Lucas, a stark contrast to the cold, unforgiving streets outside. As they sat waiting for the food, Lucas's emotions churned. He felt an odd mix of safety and uncertainty in Marcus's presence. The man sitting across from him seemed deep in thought, his brow furrowed as if wrestling with something heavy. Finally, Marcus broke the silence that had settled between them. Marcus began softly, his voice pulling the boy's attention away from the jumble of emotions swirling inside him. "You mentioned your mother disappeared a few months ago. Where was the last place you saw her?" Lucas's heart tightened at the memory. His voice, fragile yet full of sadness, came out barely above a whisper. "It was at a shelter. She was really sad, but she always tried to stay strong for me. One day she left to find work and she never came back." His eyes dropped to the table, the weight of abandonment sinking deeper as he spoke. "I tried looking for her everywhere, but I didn't know where she went." Marcus nodded, and something flickered in his eyes, an understanding that Lucas couldn't quite grasp. There was pain there, mingled with determination. "I'll help you find her," Marcus said, his voice steady, almost like a vow. "I promise you that." Lucas blinked, taken aback. He had heard promises before, empty words tossed around by strangers, but there was something about Marcus that felt different. Still, he couldn't help but wonder, why? Really? "But why would you do that for me?" he asked, his voice laced with both curiosity and doubt. Marcus smiled, but it was a sad, haunted smile, his gaze drifting away for a moment before returning to Lucas. "Sometimes," he said, his voice tinged with a heaviness Lucas didn't fully understand, "helping others is the only way to face our demons." Lucas didn't know what Marcus meant by that, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel entirely alone. A fragile hope began to grow inside him. Maybe, just maybe, Marcus really could help him find his mother. As they finished their meal, Marcus excused himself briefly, leaving behind a folder that caught Lucas's attention. His curiosity was piqued, and Lucas opened it carefully. Inside were various documents, medical reports, records from shelters and hospitals. But one piece of paper stopped him cold. It was a handwritten letter, addressed to Marcus. As Lucas scanned the words, his breath caught in his throat. The letter was from an employee at Marcus's company, detailing how one of Marcus's subsidiaries had been responsible for several evictions in Harlem, including the building where Lucas and Regina had once lived. Lucas's hands trembled as he read the damning words. His chest tightened, his heart pounding in his ears. The company had bought the building, forcing the residents to make way for a new development. And just like that, Lucas's world had fallen apart, his home taken, his mother pushed to the breaking point. The very man sitting across from him now, offering help, was the one whose decisions had destroyed his life. Anger surged through Lucas like wildfire. He slammed the folder shut, his mind racing, struggling to process the betrayal. How could Marcus do this? How could he, the man who had caused so much suffering, now stand before Lucas and offer to help him? Was it guilt that drove him? Regret for the lives he had ruined? Lucas didn't know, but one thing was clear: he needed answers. The next morning, Lucas sat quietly at breakfast, lost in his thoughts, the weight of what he had discovered pressing heavily on him. The usual noise of the world around him felt distant, muffled by the storm raging inside. Marcus, sensing the shift in Lucas's mood, furrowed his brow in concern. "Lucas," he said gently, his eyes searching the boy's face, "is everything okay? You seem distant." Lucas looked up slowly, meeting Marcus's gaze. His mind raced, battling between the anger boiling inside him and the need to understand. But he couldn't hold it back any longer. "Why did you evict us?" Lucas asked, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the tension like a knife. Marcus froze, his eyes widening with shock. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Marcus responded, I didn't know." Lucas's gaze remained fixed on Marcus, struggling to maintain an exterior of calm, though turmoil churned violently within him. He yearned to confront Marcus, to extract the painful truth that seemed to elude him. Yet simultaneously, he grappled with the disbelief that Marcus could be the true antagonist in this agonizing saga. "I'm all right," Lucas managed to say, his voice betraying a hint of unconvincing bravado. "My only concern is for my mother." Marcus acknowledged the response with a nod, though a shadow of skepticism lingered in his eyes. He chose to withhold further questioning at that moment, mentally noting the need to remain vigilant about Lucas's behavior. The remainder of the day slipped away in a disorienting haze for Lucas. He trudged through school, his mind drifting far from his lessons, fixated solely on how he would finally address Marcus. As the school bell rang, marking the end of the day, Lucas felt a mounting urgency he could no longer ignore. That evening, after a silent, strained dinner, he gathered the last of his courage. Seated in the dimly lit living room, Marcus immersed in his book while Lucas, ensconced on the sofa, pretended to be absorbed in the television. The air crackled with unsaid words. Lucas began, his voice a low whisper yet laced with steely resolve. Marcus looked up from his reading, his expression shifting as he sensed the gravity in Lucas's tone. "What is it, kid?" "Kid." Lucas inhaled deeply, struggling to keep his emotions from erupting. "Yesterday, I found something in your office." Marcus's face showed surprise, his brow furrowing. "My office? What were you doing there?" "I was curious," Lucas said, pushing aside his pang of guilt, "and I came across a folder with my mom's name on it." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, laden with unspoken tension. Marcus was acutely aware of the implications, recognizing that this confrontation was inevitable, though he hadn't anticipated it so soon. "I read the documents," Lucas pressed on, his voice quivering with barely contained fury. "They revealed that it was your company that acquired the building we lived in. That's why we were evicted. It was because of you that my mom vanished." The accusation hung heavily in the air, a suffocating blanket of anguish and betrayal. Marcus felt the crushing weight of Lucas's words, yet he maintained his composure, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "Lucas, Marcus began, but Lucas cut him off, his face flushed with hurt and anger. "How could you, Marcus?" Lucas's voice cracked as tears welled up in his eyes. "You wrecked our lives, and now you offer to help me. Is this your twisted way of seeking redemption?" Marcus swallowed hard, the lump in his throat growing larger. The undeniable truth lay bare before him, and he knew he had to confront the reality of his actions. "Lucas, I understand how horrific this seems, and believe me, I am deeply tormented by it." Marcus set his book aside and leaned forward, attempting to bridge the chasm of emotional distance. "When I discovered what happened to you and your mother, he faltered, searching for the right words. "I felt compelled to act. I had no idea that the building my company purchased was where you lived until after the fact. And by the time I realized the full extent of what had happened, it was already too late to undo the damage." Lucas stared intently at Marcus, struggling to reconcile the tumultuous emotions swirling within him. His heart was a storm of confusion and hurt. "So you're helping me out of guilt?" he asked, his voice cracking under the weight of his pain. Marcus met Lucas's gaze with an earnestness that spoke of deep regret. "Partly, yes," he admitted, his voice filled with remorse. "There is guilt, but it's more than that. I see in you an opportunity to right a wrong that I couldn't address for my mother. I understand that this doesn't erase the past, but I'm committed to making amends in any way I can." Lucas's mind raced as he absorbed Marcus's words. He wanted to channel his turmoil into rage, to reject Marcus's attempt at redemption outright. Yet there was something disarming about Marcus's presence, the raw pain reflected in his eyes, mirroring Lucas's suffering. This shared anguish forged a connection that left Lucas even more perplexed. "I don't know if I can ever trust you now," Lucas finally said, his voice trembling with vulnerability. "But the truth is, I don't have anyone else to turn to." Marcus bowed his head, acknowledging Lucas's distrust with a weight that seemed to physically burden him. "I understand your reservations, and I don't expect you to trust me immediately. But I hope that, with time, we can build something meaningful together, something that brings healing and restoration." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Marcus felt a fragile thread of hope that perhaps, despite everything, there was still a chance for redemption, a chance to right the wrongs of the past and to find a semblance of peace. As the days passed, the dynamic between Marcus and Lucas remained strained, yet there was an undercurrent of mutual understanding that kept them connected. Lucas continued his routine at school, but the search for Regina cast a shadow over every aspect of his life. The mistrust that lingered was like a dark cloud, hovering over their interactions and clouding their efforts. One afternoon, while Lucas was engaged in his classes, Marcus received a call that would shake him to his core. The urgency in the voice on the other end of the line was palpable. "Marcus, I've uncovered something about Regina, but it's distressing news." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to maintain his composure. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of the fear he felt. "She's at a shelter in the Bronx," the voice continued, "but she's critically ill. Marcus, you need to get there as soon as possible. Time is of the essence." Marcus felt a surge of panic and helplessness. The reality of the situation crashed over him like a relentless wave. Regina, the woman whose life had been shattered by his decisions, was within reach, but he was gripped by uncertainty. He faced the daunting possibility that she might reject his help, or worse, despise him for the irreversible damage he had caused. As Marcus prepared to leave, the gravity of the moment pressed heavily upon him. He understood the magnitude of what was at stake, not just for Regina, but for his quest for redemption. The journey ahead was fraught with emotional peril, and he knew that whatever awaited him at the shelter could determine not only Regina's future, but also the very essence of his attempt to make amends. Marcus grasped the cold metal of his car keys with a tremor in his hand and steered his way toward the Bronx, each mile amplifying the heavy burden he carried. He was acutely aware that this visit would be a turning point, a moment that could redefine everything for him, Lucas, and Regina. This was perhaps his final opportunity to mend what had been shattered, a chance to confront the consequences of his actions and attempt to set things right. As he navigated the winding roads leading to the Bronx, Marcus found himself lost in thought, reflecting on the twisted path that had led them all here. Fate seemed to revel in its cruel machinations, thrusting people into labyrinths of their own making, where the only options were to face their darkest fears or succumb to their destruction. The journey was fraught with a profound sense of dread and anticipation. Marcus gripped the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions and fears. He knew that at the end of this tumultuous road awaited Regina, and with her, one of the most formidable challenges he had ever faced trying to heal what might be beyond repair. The chaotic, narrow streets of the Bronx presented a jarring contrast to the pristine luxury of the Upper East Side, only deepening the weight on Marcus's chest. As he pulled up to the shelter, dusk had begun to settle, casting long shadows over the worn and weary facade of the building. The flickering yellow lights barely penetrated the gloom, illuminating the aged and dilapidated entrance. Taking a deep breath, Marcus braced himself for what lay beyond those doors. The air inside was dense and oppressive, heavy with the scent of stale smoke and desperation. He was greeted by a middle-aged man with a face etched in exhaustion and seriousness. "You must be Marcus Adams," the man said, offering a firm handshake that felt more like a weighty ritual than a greeting. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "Yes, that's me," Marcus replied, his voice betraying the anxiety simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I'm here to see Regina Duarte." The man's solemn nod did little to reassure Marcus. "This way," he instructed, leading Marcus down a dimly lit corridor. Their footsteps echoed hollowly against the grimy tile walls, each step amplifying Marcus's sense of foreboding. "She's in a delicate condition," the man continued as they walked. "When Regina first arrived here, she was barely clinging to life. Despite our efforts, her health has continued to decline." He hesitated, the gravity of his words weighing heavily on him. "I'm afraid there's not much more we can do." The man's words pierced Marcus's heart like shards of glass. He tried to steel himself for the encounter, but the reality of Regina's state was more harrowing than he could have imagined. As he reached the small, dimly lit room, Marcus was struck by the sight before him. Regina lay in a narrow bed, her once vibrant complexion now a ghostly pallor, her cheeks hollowed and her hair a mere shadow of its former luster. Her eyes, which had once radiated strength and determination, now appeared dim and clouded. A lump formed in Marcus's throat, rendering him momentarily immobile. Regina looked so frail, so defeated, that approaching her felt like an insurmountable task. But he knew he had to confront this moment. Each step toward her felt like a leaden weight, burdened with the gravity of his guilt and the gravity of the situation. When he finally reached her bedside, Regina's eyes fluttered open slowly, as if each movement was a Herculean effort. "Regina," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and remorse. "It's me, Marcus." Regina's eyes struggled to focus on him, widening with a myriad of emotions, first surprise, then confusion, and finally, to Marcus's deepest dread, a glimmer of disdain. The look in her eyes was a piercing reminder of the profound damage his actions had wrought, and Marcus felt a wave of sorrow and guilt crash over him. He stood there, overwhelmed by the weight of his past decisions and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Marcus Adams. Regina's voice, though faint, carried a sharp edge of bitterness. The words seemed to cut through the sterile air of the room, laden with a lifetime of suffering and resentment. "What are you doing here?" "Air." Marcus felt the weight of every syllable, each one a dagger to his conscience. Despite the crushing guilt threatening to overwhelm him, he held his ground. "I'm here to help Regina. I understand. I understand that I'm the one who caused this suffering." His voice trembled, barely more than a whisper, as he continued, "I never knew you were living in that building. If I had known, I would have done everything in my power to prevent the eviction." Regina's response was a bitter, hollow laugh that quickly dissolved into a painful, wheezing cough. "Does it even matter now?" she demanded, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that revealed the depth of her anguish. "You destroyed the only sanctuary I had left, Marcus. The only place Lucas and I could call home. You have no concept of the devastation you've wrought upon us." Marcus's attempts to speak were futile, the words choked up in his throat. He yearned to apologize, to beg for her forgiveness, but he knew deep down that no words could ever make amends for the destruction he had caused. The realization that nothing could ever be enough hung heavily in the air between them. As Regina's breathing became more labored, Lucas lingered by her bedside, his resolve wavering. "We need to go now," Marcus said softly but firmly, aware of the delicate balance between respect and practicality. "Your mom needs to rest. We can return tomorrow." Lucas's eyes were filled with reluctant concern, unable to fathom leaving his mother alone in such a state. "What if she needs me?" he implored, his voice cracking with worry. "The doctors are taking good care of her," Marcus assured him with a gentle firmness. "I promise we'll come back first thing in the morning." Though Lucas hesitated, the promise of returning offered him a fragile sense of reassurance. He leaned over and kissed Regina's forehead tenderly, his heart weighed down by a mix of sorrow and uncertainty. As they exited the room, Marcus could feel the palpable tension between them. In the car, the drive home was shrouded in a heavy silence. Lucas's mind replayed the day's events, each thought a tumultuous wave crashing against the shores of his understanding. Marcus, fully aware of the emotional storm brewing within Lucas, respected his need for silence and reflection. Upon arriving at the apartment, Lucas retreated to his room, his body and spirit drained. Marcus, however, was unable to find solace in rest. The knowledge of the arduous journey ahead and Regina's fragile recovery gnawed at him. The ensuing weeks saw Marcus and Lucas entangled in a routine of hospital visits. Each day brought a mix of cautious optimism and unrelenting uncertainty as Regina's condition fluctuated. Though Lucas began to see Marcus's earnest efforts to atone for his wrongs, the mistrust lingering in his heart remained palpable. That sense of unease reached a fever pitch one day when Lucas arrived at the hospital to find his mother's room empty. Panic surged through him like a tidal wave, freezing him in the doorway as his mind raced. "Where's my mom?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the strain of his anxiety. The nurse passing by looked at him with a sympathetic yet grave expression. "Your mom was moved to the EQ," she said gently, her words carrying a somber weight. "She had a setback this morning." The nurse's announcement struck Lucas with the force of a gut-wrenching blow. His legs felt as though they might buckle beneath him, the room spinning with the vertigo of his fear. Marcus, who had been close behind, caught Lucas just in time, his fear masked by a veneer of calm. "Calm down," Marcus said, though his voice was strained, betraying his inner turmoil. "We'll find out what's happening and get through this together." The intensity of the situation and the magnitude of the unfolding crisis loomed over them both, leaving them in a harrowing limbo where the hope for recovery clashed brutally with the fear of irreversible loss. Marcus and Lucas rushed to the ICU, their steps quickened by the urgency of Regina's condition. The sterile, cold air of the hospital seemed to chill them to the bone as they were met by a doctor who spoke in a measured, clinical tone. "Regina has suffered a significant complication. She's in critical condition right now," the doctor explained, his words punctuated by the beeping monitors and the soft hum of medical equipment. Lucas listened, his face a mask of devastation. The fear of losing his mother engulfed him, making each breath feel like a laborious effort. Marcus, standing close by, tried to offer support, but his sense of guilt and helplessness weighed heavily on him. He felt like an observer in a nightmare that he had orchestrated, unable to change the outcome but desperately wishing he could. The days that followed were agonizingly slow. Lucas spent nearly every waking moment by Regina's side, holding her frail hand and speaking to her softly, hoping that somehow she could hear him and feel his presence. Marcus was always there, a silent support in the background, trying to be a pillar of strength for Lucas while battling his overwhelming guilt. The constant shadow of Regina's deteriorating health seemed to loom over them both, an inescapable specter of despair. One morning, Lucas arrived at the hospital only to find Regina's room empty once more. The usual routine of explanations and updates was replaced by a heavy silence that settled around him like a suffocating fog. His heart sank with a premonition that was soon confirmed by the somber faces of the medical staff. Regina had passed away, her battle with illness and the hardships of her life proving too much to overcome. The realization hit Lucas with a force that left him physically weak. He found himself crumpled in the hallway, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders heaving with silent, shattering sobs. Marcus approached cautiously, his own heart breaking at the sight of Lucas's despair. He sat beside the boy without a word, offering the only comfort he could at that moment, his presence. For hours, Lucas cried, the tears flowing uncontrollably as Marcus remained beside him, a silent witness to the depth of his grief. When the tears finally subsided, Lucas looked at Marcus with eyes red and swollen, his face etched with pain, anger, and a profound sense of loss. "You promised she'd be okay," Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with raw emotion. Marcus felt each word as a painful stab, his heart heavy with the weight of his failure. "I know, Lucas, I'm so sorry. I wish there was more I could have done." Lucas shook his head, his expression one of bitter acceptance. "Nothing you do now will bring her back." He stood up, pulling away from Marcus, his body language a clear sign of his inability to be near him any longer. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this." Marcus remained silent, his grief mirroring Lucas's. He understood that Lucas's pain was too fresh, too deep for any words of comfort to reach him. He had failed, and the consequences of that failure were now irreversibly etched into their lives. Lucas left the hospital with a hollow feeling that seemed to consume him. The loss of his mother, the only person who had been his anchor, left him adrift and isolated. Although Marcus had tried to help, the reality of his role in their suffering was inescapable. In the days that followed, Lucas withdrew from Marcus, spending more time at school and wandering the streets in search of some semblance of peace. Marcus, respecting Lucas's need for distance, continued to be a quiet presence, his own heart consumed by guilt and sorrow. He knew he had lost Lucas's trust and possibly any hope for redemption. One evening, after a particularly long day, Lucas returned home later than usual. Marcus was waiting for him in the living room, as he had done so many times before, but this time, Lucas surprised him by sitting down beside him on the couch. "Why are you still helping me after everything I've said?" Lucas asked, his voice soft and tentative. Marcus looked at him, his eyes reflecting the pain and regret he felt. "Because I feel I owe it to you, Lucas. I know I can't bring your mother back, but I want to do whatever I can to help you move forward." Lucas was silent for a long moment, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. His tears began to flow again, not from the immediate sorrow, but from a deeper, more complex mix of emotions. "I want to forgive you, Marcus, but I don't know how." Marcus felt a surge of emotion, his tears threatening to surface. He reached out and placed his hand over Lucas's, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to decide that now, Lucas. Whatever you're feeling, I'll respect it. But know that I'll be here for you, no matter what happens." Lucas nodded, tears streaming down his face, his shoulders trembling slightly. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was undoubtedly difficult, but Marcus's unwavering support offered him a fragile sense of not being completely alone. It was a small step, but perhaps it was the beginning of healing the deep wounds that had scarred his soul. Lucas sat there, clutching the letter from his mother as if it were the most precious thing in the world. His eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, the words flowing through him like a balm to his wounded heart. Regina's message was a testament to her enduring love and her belief in him, even in the darkest of times. As he read the final lines, the weight of her forgiveness for Marcus settled heavily on him. The idea of forgiving Marcus, which had seemed so insurmountable, now felt a little less daunting. Regina's wish for them to move forward together, despite the mistakes and pain, gave Lucas a sense of perspective he hadn't had before. Marcus watched from a distance, understanding the profound impact the letter had on Lucas. He respected the boy's need for time and space, but he also hoped that this small gesture from Regina might help bridge the gap between them. The letter was more than just words, it was a lifeline that connected them to Regina's love and hopes for their future. The days that followed were filled with quiet but significant changes. Lucas started to engage more with Marcus, not with words of forgiveness or grand gestures, but with small, tentative steps toward healing. They began to share moments of normalcy again, cooking meals together or watching TV, which slowly began to rebuild the fractured trust between them. Marcus continued to respect Lucas's pace, offering encouragement without pressure. He took care of the practical matters, ensuring that Lucas had what he needed while giving him the freedom to grieve and heal in his way. The house, though still shrouded in a lingering sadness, started to feel less like a place of sorrow and more like a space where new beginnings could take root. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Lucas turned to Marcus with a tentative but genuine smile. "Thank you for giving me the letter. It meant a lot." Marcus returned the smile, a mixture of relief and gratitude in his eyes. "I'm glad it helped. Your mom loved you very much, Lucas. I hope you find some comfort in her words." Lucas nodded, his expression softening. "I think I do. It's going to take time, but I want to try and move forward. For her." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. The journey ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, filled with ups and downs, but for the first time in a while, it seemed possible that they could navigate it together. The road to healing was long, but with each step they took, the weight of Regina's memory became a guiding light rather than a burden. And so Marcus and Lucas continued their path forward, carrying Regina's love and lessons in their hearts. They faced each day with the understanding that while the pain of loss would never fully disappear, the strength of their connection and the memories of Regina's love would help them rebuild their lives, one step at a time. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The park was bathed in the golden glow of the afternoon sun, and for the first time in a long while, Both Marcus and Lucas felt a sense of serenity. As they watched the children playing, their laughter mingling with the rustling of the leaves, they were reminded of the simple joys that life still had to offer, despite the pain they had endured. Marcus and Lucas's journey had been marked by profound loss and heartache, but their shared experiences had forged a bond that neither of them could have anticipated. Through their grief and healing, they discovered a new sense of purpose and connection. Marcus's foundation flourished, providing support and hope to many families in need, and Lucas found solace in working alongside Marcel's, turning his pain into a beacon of hope for others. In their quiet moments together, they often reflected on the journey that had brought them to where they were. The healing process was ongoing, but they had learned to navigate their grief while embracing the possibility of new beginnings. Marcus found redemption not only in his philanthropic efforts but also in the genuine relationship he had built with Lucas. For Lucas, the act of helping others became a tribute to his mother's memory, a way to honor her legacy and continue the love she had instilled in him. As they walked through the park, Lucas glanced at Marcus and asked, "Do you think we're making a difference?" Marcus looked back at him with a thoughtful expression. "I believe we are. Every time we help someone, every time we bring a little bit of hope into someone's life, we honor your mom's memory and the lesson she taught us. It's not always easy, but I think she'd be proud of how far we've come." Lucas nodded, feeling a sense of fulfillment that had once seemed impossible. "I think so too. It's strange, but I feel like even though she's gone, she's still with us in a way. Her love and her lessons are part of what drives us." Marcus smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "She'll always be a part of us, Lucas. In everything we do, in every life we touch, her spirit lives on." As they continued their walk, the park seemed to reflect their renewed hope. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with both challenges and opportunities. Yet, with each step, they moved forward with the strength and resilience they had gained from their shared experiences. They knew that the road to healing would be long, and that the scars of the past would always be a part of their story. But they also knew that together they had the power to make a positive impact, to find meaning in their suffering, and to honor Regina's memory in the most meaningful way possible. And so Marcus and Lucas walked on, their hearts heavy with the weight of their past, but also buoyed by the hope of a brighter future. They were bound not just by their grief, but by a deep and enduring connection, one forged through pain, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief in the power of love and redemption. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a serene twilight over the park, Marcus and Lucas walked in thoughtful silence, the beauty of the evening mirroring the quiet strength they had found in each other. The soft, warm colors of the sky seemed to embrace them, a gentle reminder of the resilience they had discovered together. Their path forward was still uncertain, marked by the echoes of past sorrows and the promise of new beginnings. Yet, in their shared commitment to honoring Regina's memory, they had forged a bond that was both healing and empowering. The love and lessons she had imparted continued to guide them, providing both solace and motivation as they navigated their new reality. The world, with all its complexities and challenges, had shown them the possibility of redemption and the power of forgiveness. It was a harsh teacher, but it also revealed the strength of the human spirit and the potential for transformation even in the darkest of times. Marcus and Lucas were determined to embrace every opportunity for growth and change, to live lives that reflected the values Regina had held dear. With each step they took, they felt a sense of purpose and hope, driven by the belief that their journey together could make a meaningful difference. They understood that while the past could not be changed, the future was theirs to shape with intention and compassion. As the park grew quieter with the approach of night, they knew their journey was far from over, but in each other's company, and with Regina's enduring presence in their hearts, they felt equipped to face whatever lay ahead. They were ready to seize every chance to create a life full of meaning, guided by the legacy of love, courage, and forgiveness that Regina had left behind. As we wrap up today's story, I hope you found inspiration in the powerful journey of Marcus and Lucas. Their path through grief, forgiveness, and rebuilding offers us profound lessons about resilience, the impact of love, and the importance of second chances. What have you learned from their experiences? How do you think these lessons can apply to your own life? I'd love to hear from you. Please share one thing you've learned and how you plan to bring it into your own life in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content that inspires and empowers. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching.